Okay, now, I did say that we can't stop the shortening, but there are ways to accelerate the shortening. And that is anything related to an unhealthy lifestyle. So obesity, lack of exercise, psychological stress, or smoking are all things that can cause telomere shortenings. These things generate free radicals, and the free radicals can clip our DNA and accelerate the shortening of our DNA. Now, you've heard things like papers have been published saying that meditation can reduce the rate of telomere shortening. Well, this is because it's not really reducing the basal level telomere shortening I was just talking about. It's reducing this type of telomere shortening. So you can reduce this type of telomere shortening that's showing here simply by watching what you eat, exercise, take your antioxidants, and do what your doctors. Of course, you're all doctors, so you know what you're doing. So we can affect this, and this is what I call accelerated telomere shortening. We can affect this, but we can't do anything about the basal level of telomere shortening. Now, so basal level telomere shortening results from cell division. Now, there is one way to accelerate this telomere shortening, but not per cell division. But we can accelerate it by inducing cell division. So if we induce rapid cell division, the more the cells divide, the shorter the telomeres are going to get. So the cells aren't shortening faster per cell division, but they are shortening faster per time. So anytime you give a patient something that's going to induce cell division, you're risking the chance that you're going to give faster telomere shortening to that patient. The other thing is that an unhealthy lifestyle, as I showed, can result in accelerated telomere shortening. But now, for my talk, I'd like to focus on this middle one. This induction of cell division results in additional telomere shortening. And this relates to, well, mitogenic treatments. Now, a mitogen, of course, is something that's going to induce cell division. So anytime you treat cells with a mitogen, when we do this in a petri dish with cells grown in a petri dish, we find the telomeres shorten. So now there's a lot of mitogenic treatments that a lot of you are doing. And this includes microdermabrasion. When you scrape your face, scrape the skin off a face, or when you treat with acid, what happens is fibroblasts inside the skin grow to replace those cells that you killed off. Well, those fibroblast cells are dividing, therefore you would think telomeres would be shortening. And I would say you would think because I don't know if anybody's done any research on it. I'm actually just bringing up this subject because of the fact that I'm worried that this might be something that's happening. And I think that people need to be looking at this. Something else is immune boosters. Whenever you give your patient an immune booster, something to boost the immune system, you're causing proliferation of immune cells. And therefore, you would think telomeres would be shortening. And we don't know because nobody's really looking at that. Stem cell therapies isn't really a mitogenic treatment, but when you take stem cells from a person, you typically expand them, culture them, grow them, before you put them back into a person. So the stem cells, theoretically, should have shorter telomeres and therefore be essentially older than the cells that you isolated from the person when you put them into a person. Now, the thing that I think is most relevant to the people in this audience is hormones. And I'm going to tell you right now, I am not an expert in this area. And I have been in contact with a lot of doctors, some of them in this room, trying to get information about this. And so in some of these slides that you'll see, if anybody would like to see me afterwards and help me fill in some of the blanks here, I'd sure appreciate it, because I think this is something we need to look at. But here's a list of hormones that I think a lot of you use or prescribe, that I've made a list on the left-hand side. And I've tried on the right-hand side to find out, do these hormones play a role in cell proliferation? And we can see, like one I know for certain is human growth hormone induces IGF-1. IGF-1 is going to induce bone and muscle cell proliferation. Well, what is happening to those bone cells and muscle cells? We all think HGH is making us younger, but are they in fact making us older? Are we getting some kind of boost of youth that we're going to pay for dearly later on when our telomeres get shorter and our cells senesce before our friends who didn't take HGH, they look younger than we do when we're 75, let's say. We don't know what's going on here. Okay, so I've tried to go through and make a list. I think I found that thyroid hormone does induce liver, pancreas, and lymphocyte proliferation. Melatonin induces lymphocyte proliferation. And the 7-keto DHEA induces fibroblast proliferation. But I don't know anything about the other ones here. And so if anybody here is an expert in this, I'd sure like to talk with you afterwards. But it's something that I think people have to be wondering about. Is this something is using these hormones actually accelerating aging and not decreasing aging? Okay, so these metagenic treatments are, in my opinion, good things. I'm the last person that's going to try to say that we should not use these things. And so what I think the better solution is to see if we can find a way to prevent telomere shortening, which is the whole purpose of my research. And so one thing we do know is that our reproductive cells do not age. So I've been saying that how cells, when they divide, their telomeres get shortened. Well, that's not true in our reproductive cells. Our telomere shortening does not occur in our reproductive cells. And this is kind of like, should be kind of obvious, because if we age because our cells age, then our children should be born as old as our cells are. But they're not. They're born younger. So somehow our reproductive cells have overcome the cellular senescence process. And they've done so. This is an enzyme that I led the research and the discovery of about 12 years ago, human telomerase. These cells, reproductive cells, contain human telomerase. And this is shown here. A green thing is the DNA molecule shown as a double helix. Here's the very end of the DNA, and this telomerase, shown as a factory, is bound to the end of the DNA, and it's actually lengthening the telomere. So that's why our reproductive cells don't have telomere shortening, because this enzyme prevents them from shortening. Going back to our bricklaying model, what this compares to is our bricklayer is still going to fall off the end of the wall when he gets to the end of the wall, but like an angel, telomerase comes in and replaces that brick. As a result, our telomeres don't get shorter. So over and over again, our cells will divide, and at least our reproductive cells, and telomerase will keep them from getting shorter. So the big question, how can we produce telomerase in all of our cells? It's only produced in our reproductive cells. Wouldn't it be nice if we had it in all of our cells? And so our simple strategy in my research labs is to take into account that somatic cells don't produce telomerase. Of course, somatic cells are all of our other cells besides our reproductive cells. But the somatic cells, all of our cells, do contain the gene for telomerase. It's just shut off. So our simple strategy is let's just turn it back on again. So we've been spending a lot of time working on doing that. Now, telomerase is produced by the telomerase gene. This is now the chromosome. Here's the telomerase gene in the chromosome, and it's producing telomerase. Next to the, I'm sorry if people on that side can't see where I'm pointing, but next to every gene is a regulatory element, and this regulatory element is controlling the expression of that gene. So it's, in this particular case, in our reproductive cells, the gene is turned on. Now, in all of our other cells, a protein comes along and binds to that regulatory element, shutting it off. So that regulatory element is like an on-off switch for a light switch. But in this case, that protein is called a repressor protein. It shuts it off. And what we want to do at my company is we want to find a drug that will bind to that repressor, dislodge it from the repressor, and turn it on. If you decide later that you don't want the gene turned on anymore, you can quit taking the drug, and the repressor will go back and shut the gene off again. So, and we're calling that an anti-repressor. So this is a team of scientists working with me right now that's working on this project. We are in Reno, Nevada. We've been working there since 1999 on this project. We do have a lot of lab space. We're very lab intensive. And we have robots that are doing high throughput screening for us. There's 2 robots, one right there and one right there, and one right there and one right there. And you can see a robotic arm in the red circle there. That robotic arm is carrying microtiter dishes, and these robots will screen 96 to 384 different compounds or chemicals at a time, looking for things that might turn on the telomerase gene. And the key is, I want everybody to be aware, a very significant effort is underway here to try to find a way to induce telomerase expression. So as of just a few days ago, we have now screened 159,588 chemicals, and we've actually found 33 hits. That is, we have found 33 of these green things that are dislodging this repressor and turning the gene on. So they call it a hit. Now, so we've found 33 chemicals that turn on the telomerase gene, and we are continuing to screen for more compounds at a rate of 4,000 chemicals per week. So what we have to do next, this is a big step we've made here. Nobody has ever found any kind of chemicals that would turn on the telomerase gene prior to a few years ago. When we found our first one 2 years ago. There's one other that's available actually commercially that I'll talk about later that's available now. But these are all new things, having chemicals that actually turn on the telomerase gene. What we have to do next is we now have to do medicinal chemistry. Excuse me. The chemicals that we've found so far are not ready for human use. In a primary screen, they never are ready for human use. What we need to do now is do things like structure-activity relationships, mechanism of action studies. We need to make these chemicals more suitable for human use, make them more potent and less toxic. And we expect that to take us about another 3 years to have something that we will take into preclinical and clinical research. We expect that to take about another 7 to 10 years, and we'll have something available for public use in about 10 to 15 years. And we think this is the biggest thing that will ever hit the planet. We think having things like this that will turn on the telomerase will change the world. There's a lot of different things in health are going to be affected by finding ways to prevent telomere shortening. So this is probably where I should stop because that's where we are right now. And how much time do I have? Okay, I have plenty of time. I want to point out that after everything I've said, I haven't shown you a single thing that says that actually turning on telomerase and preventing telomere shortening will have anything to do with preventing senescence. It's all a theory, and so it's still a big question mark. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel because we do have some proof of concept experiments that we've done. And we can't do the ideal experiment, which is to just find a drug that dislodged that because, that's what we're trying to prove will work. But right now, we're still trying to find drugs that do that. So in the past, what we've done is we've done something called telomerizing cells. And that's where we use a virus to carry the gene, the telomerase gene, into a cell. This is gene therapy. So the virus carries the gene in, and then that gene expresses telomerase without a regulatory element next to it, so it's always producing it. So we've made cells, human cells grown in a petri dish, that have a exogenous telomerase gene expressing telomerase. Okay, so when we take normal human skin cells or any kind of cell and grow them in a petri dish, we find that after a certain number of days, they stop growing, they level off. This is the number of days in culture on the x-axis, the y-axis is the number of cell doublings. As the telomeres get short, the cells lose the ability to divide. That's what cell senescence is. And this limit, this line here where this maximum they reach is called the Hayflick limit. When you take cells from a young person, the Hayflick limit will be higher, and if you take cells from an old person, it'll be lower. But in all cases, when you take human cells and grow them in a petri dish, at least normal human cells, you'll find that they slow down and stop dividing. Now, when we used telomerized cells, we found that they actually did not slow down. This is the first time anybody has ever done this. These telomerized cells were shown to be very resistant, the most healthy cells in the world, very resistant to mutations, and also had a decreased risk of getting cancer. We published this in 1997 or 1998. Can't see the date from here. Made headline news in a lot of newspapers. But one thing that we saw is that the telomeres didn't just stop shortening. The whole idea was to see if we could prevent telomere shortening. Would that extend the lifespan of these cells? They didn't stop shortening. They actually got longer. And this begged the question, did we actually make the cells younger? And so I left this. This is when I was working at Geron Corporation. I led the research where we discovered telomerase and did these experiments. But I left to start my own company. And after I left, one of the people that worked with me, Walter Funk, did the following experiment. He took young cells and old cells and then telomerized the old cells and then grew all these cells into skin on the back of a mouse. And he found when he looked at the young cells, the young skin look like young skin,